Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, the summer season. I was joking with my guest here that I now have changed my Zoom name to Doctor, but we'll see. I'm relishing changing all my social media accounts to Doctor, and then eventually the moment will pass. But I'm going to soak as much juice out of this as I can. But I want to introduce a really special guest, someone who I've known since I was an undergrad in terms of work, not in terms of actually talking with him. So it really is a beautiful manifestation that he's joined here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room with me. I'm joined with Dr. Tim Dean, who's a British philosopher, author. He is all things queer theory. Um, and literary theory. He is the James M. Benson Professor in English at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is the author of Unlimited Intimacy, Reflections on the Subculture of Barebacking, Beyond Sexuality. Recently, he published The Hatred of Sex with Oliver Davis. He also did a Walt Whitman poetic article that is in my dissertation. Um, and he also contributed to Homosexuality and Psychoanalysis, which is staring at me because I have all of his books in front of me. Well, Tim, without further ado, thank you so much for joining me here. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, and I look forward to talking with you.
Yeah, well, right away, I mean, I'm gonna want everyone to be on the edge of their seats for when we discuss barebacking and unlimited intimacy and that 2009 moment when your work came out, which to give context, I was in high school. But I do remember seeing that cover and what that was like as an undergrad. But I think even before that, if we can journey back, Tim, on this adventure in the 1990s when you got your PhD, what was it like? I knew you were working on not necessarily queer cultural studies, but it seems like you were really interested in psychoanalysis. Like, how did that first enter the realm of what you were interested in?
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's good to give some prehistory to the work that, excuse me, your listeners might be the work of mine. The listeners might be most familiar with. Um, yeah, I went to graduate school. I graduated from college in 1988 when you were not even in high school yet, right? Um,
I
we
wasn't
did.
alive yet, but
Right, right. Um, I went to graduate school. I graduated and went to graduate school in 1988, and queer theory did not exist at that point, right? It was something we were at the end of the 80s, start of the 90s, starting to invent, and I went to graduate school in English to study poetry. And I wrote a dissertation on Hart Crane, although I also did, of course, read Whitman in graduate school and in college, although not in high school. We don't do that in England, right? Um, but I was also very engaged. I was sort of engaged on two fronts in graduate school when I was living in Baltimore, in addition to working on poetry. One was engaged in a kind of intense set of theoretical debates about how to think about sexuality and gender. Um, we had feminism, we had the history of feminist theory and feminist activism, and we had sort of gay studies and gay activism, and we were starting to think more broadly in terms of queer, right? And we were thinking about it both in terms of politics and in terms of conceptualization.
mm,
And the other thing that was sort of unavoidably pressing itself upon me was that we were still in the first decade of the AIDS epidemic, right? And I had just moved to the United States, to this very urban environment, and I was getting involved in in that kind of work. And as a young, at that point, at that point, a young gay man, I was thinking about, okay, what does this mean for my life, for my sex life, for my community, and that was part of being in Baltimore, not simply being at Johns Hopkins in graduate school. And for me, those two things came together. Um, thinking about AIDS, thinking about queer, thinking about sexuality, and this is a long way round of talking about psychoanalysis, which I was not actually sure we were going to talk about today. Um, Psychoanalysis was I came sort of armed with some psychoanalytic readings, knowledge, perspectives. It's sort of part of my worldview, really, which I think has to do with not being also has to do with not being American. The different status of psychoanalysis in British intellectual life versus American intellectual life. So I was always interested in, the status of sexuality vis-a-vis the unconscious and the importance of fantasy, and those are concepts and ideas and themes that have stayed sort of either on the surface or subterranean in my work, I think, for a long time. Um,
Yeah, well, and I'm sure you're aware of there's the concept of the pre-homosexual in terms of like moving before Foucault or like before
sure,
Victorian sexology. I mean, I even in my dissertation talk about the pre-homosexual with looking more at Whitman's depictions of same-sex desire between men without using arguing against using anachronistic, like trying to throw on terms of
sure,
homosexuality, bisexuality,
sure.
um, to look deep into the poetics. But like what I love what you're saying about psychoanalysis, Tim, is the reason I am so interested in that approach when you were working on Hart Crane in your PhD with your dissertation is because I know that you kind of like Vernon Rosario, who's been on the show, Thomas Thomas Woe, who did Hard to Imagine, that book. Um, sorry, Thomas. I knew I'm gonna get your last name right. But
My name is very easy to pronounce.
I know. Well, Dean, yes, you had the you're very lucky with the phonetics. But you also like we're part of seeing that changing wave. And then I remember your article on the eve of a queer future is just so beautifully done in the 90s. And it's like right when Judith Butler has done Gender Trouble. We have Epistemology of the Closet with Eve Sedgwick. And I know that you worked or knew Leo Bersani, and he had the essay Is the Rectum a Grave, which is before queer theory, technically, in our lineage. But
Right, in
he really
chronology, yeah.
was thinking through the AIDS epidemic and how do we get pleasure as gay men or queer men specifically? Like, how did Leo Bersani, is this, you had read his essay and then you were introduced to him, or had you always known Leo Bersani during your PhD work?
Um, no, that's a great question. And Andrew, it's very touching to me that you say such nice things about that on the eve of a queer future essay from long ago, which was not universally received with adoration or respect at the time, right? And I think that one of the things that drew me to Leo and sort of was at the basis of our friendship was the sense that in order to be sort of intellectually serious and rigorous and intellectually full strength in a way, what was becoming queer theory, queer studies, had to be willing to air debates, had to be willing to have argument. We had to be willing to really have arguments with each other about ideas and about politics within the field, and not keep those in the closet. And my willingness as a young person to have those arguments with people like Judith Butler, both in the classroom and in print, and with people like Eve Sedgwick, um, I think was I think that was part of what drew Leo and I to each other as people, as humans. Um, I never worked with Leo. There was a room. I was not his student. I was never his colleague. There was a rumor we met in a bathhouse. Uh, that's not true. We got to know each other through our work, our respective work, and of course, his essay "Is the Rectum a Grave" was very important to me, and it's a very difficult and dense and important essay, and it's one that um, I'm not sure that I really grasped the first few times I read it, but I was also compelled by it. And as you say, it's bringing psychoanalysis and intense questions of sexuality into the discussion of AIDS in a way that was really sort of groundbreaking. Um, but Leo and I sort of got to know each other through our work, and then we became friends, and had. I know that you're interested in forms of intimacy. We had a very kind of intimate friendship without ever being, um, you know, the difference between Leo's age and mine is about the same as the difference between your age and mine, I guess, right? That is different generations. And we were never colleagues. We were not technically in the same field. He was a professor of French, right? We didn't live in the same city most of the time. Um, but we became very close and had a very particular kind of friendship. And he was for me a very important intellectual mentor, intellectually more than professionally, I would say,
Mm.
right? Um, but our friendship was based on, it was talking about ideas, and of course talking about men too, and talking about the things that gay men talk about when they get together, but also really committed to talking about ideas.
Well, and for everyone out there, you need to like they need to type into Google is the rectum a grave? And Tim's on the eve of a queer future, because is the rectum a grave? Like even just having that word rectum in, right, this is from the 80s, well, late 80s, the essay.
Right.
And like that right away jumped out at me. And like this metaphor that really argues against, in my opinion, Larry Kramer's the normal heart rhetoric, his play. And Larry Kramer was really about abstinence, or like kind of was really, I don't want to say taking pleasure away from queer men, but was saying, okay, you can't, was blaming queer men for engaging in sex when they knew the risks of AIDS. But that's why I thought Lear Bassani was so polemic in, okay, well, how about the men who are engaging? Because even though we might have this ideal of stopping spreading, men still want to have sex. And this is happening. And that's what I really enjoyed, is that Leo, like you, Tim, you're able to bring in theoretical ideas without making it so technical that we start to lose the thread. And I don't, want to make this a queer men versus the female queer theorists debate, but it is interesting to me how much Eve Sedgwick, I mean, she's informed so much of our work, but I do sometimes wonder, like, it's almost Eve Sedgwick has to be a um touchstone for queer theory that's done even now with uh dissertations. I mean, I always see David Halperin's 100 Years of Homosexuality as more of my touchstone because of the ancient Greek references that I look into. But like, why do you think, Tim, and it's not about Eve Sedgwick, I don't never met her, and it's very sad how, she passed away. Why do you think though there's two or three queer theorists, I'll say Michelle Foucault, Eve Sedgwick, and Judith Butler, who really become tokenized? Like, what is it about their work that it becomes such a circular reference point?
Right, that's a good question. That's a good question, Andrew. I want to just like throw in an anecdote before I answer that question.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host and director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I hope you're enjoying what you're watching on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So to watch the rest of the episode, head to our Patreon. It is patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. That's Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And you can watch the rest of the episode on our $5 a month membership called ITBR Student, or join the ITBR Professor membership. It's only $10 a month. You get access to all of our videos. You get access to both of our book clubs, the Ivory Tower Boiler Room and the True Crime and Academia book club. Plus, you unlock all of our other episodes. So at the ITBR Student, you only get access to our weekly interviews and the True Crime and Academia episodes. For $10 a month, you get access to our ITBR rewatches, our Teaches series, and True Crime and Academia rewatches and Teaches series, plus the book clubs. Okay, can't wait to see you all on Patreon. And just a reminder, I also offer consultation services. It is $30 for your initial consultation. You get a 1 hour private Zoom with me, and I will help you whether you want to create your own podcast and or media brand, you want to navigate academia as an undergrad or grad student, you need help with technology as it relates to teaching or media, do you want to expand your social media presence as an artist, writer, podcaster, or academic, or even crafting your public humanities identity, I will help you with my consultation services. You can also find that on Patreon as well. Okay. Thank you all for watching and for supporting the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Bye.